Zak Bagans has been the face of Ghost Adventures for 20 seasons. The franchise he built from a consumer camera and an overnight lockdown at the Goldfield Hotel into the most recognized paranormal investigation brand in television history. He has never walked away from it, until now. What happened behind the scenes that produced the decision nobody in the Ghost Adventures audience was prepared for is what this video documents completely. Subscribe and stay until the very end because the full story changes everything. Zak Bagans did not stumble into Ghost Adventures, he built it. The origin story is documented well enough that the Ghost Adventures audience knows its outline. The consumer camera, the overnight lockdown at the Goldfield Hotel in Goldfield, Nevada, the independent documentary whose footage convinced a network that what Bagans was doing in front of a camera in haunted locations was different enough from everything else the paranormal television genre was producing to justify a broadcast deal. What is less well documented, what the 20 seasons of broadcast content that followed the original documentary have never fully represented, is what sustaining Ghost Adventures across 20 seasons at the level of personal investment and personal exposure that the show's authenticity has always required has cost the man at the center of it. Ghost Adventures works because Zak Bagans is genuinely invested in what the show documents. Not invested in the entertainment format, invested in the paranormal question itself, in the specific and personal way that a man whose first significant paranormal experience produced a response that organized the subsequent decades of his professional life around understanding it is invested. He has discussed this origin investment across multiple public communications in terms that communicate something specific about the character of the commitment the show represents. Not a career choice, but a vocation. The specific kind of sustained personal calling that produces the quality of genuine engagement the audience recognizes in his on-camera presence, and that distinguishes Ghost Adventures from the paranormal television format's more manufactured alternatives. Sustaining a vocation across 20 seasons of cable television production, with everything that sustained commercial production requires from the person whose genuine personal investment is the product's most essential commercial asset, produces a specific and cumulative toll whose character the broadcast format has never been designed to fully represent. The physical toll of sustained direct exposure to extreme locations under production conditions that prioritize dramatic content alongside investigative rigor. The psychological toll of 20 years of genuine engagement with phenomenon whose implications for the nature of reality, his scientific collaborators, and his own experience have been building toward conclusions that his public communications have been carefully managing. The professional toll of maintaining the creative and investigative integrity of a franchise whose commercial scale has created institutional pressures whose direction is not always aligned with the investigation's genuine demands. All of it has been accumulating across 20 seasons. And what happened behind the scenes that produced the decision this video's title describes is the specific development whose character made continued accumulation something Bagans assessed as no longer sustainable in the form Ghost Adventures has always required from him. The Ghost Adventures franchise at 20 seasons is an institutional entity whose scale and whose commercial infrastructure bear almost no resemblance to the independent documentary that produced it. The Travel Channel broadcast relationship, the Haunted Museum in Las Vegas whose permanent existence as a physical institution whose curation Bagans has personally overseen gives the franchise a presence outside the broadcast format that no comparable paranormal television production has established. The Demon House documentary whose specific production circumstances and whose specific personal consequences Bagans has discussed more candidly than any other single investigation in his public record. The books, the merchandise, the production company infrastructure whose operation the franchise's commercial scale has required, the social media presence whose sustained maintenance is its own specific and ongoing demand on the attention and the creative energy of the person at its center. Building all of that across 20 seasons while simultaneously maintaining the genuine investigative engagement that the show's authenticity requires, while continuing to personally enter locations whose extreme character the franchise's reputation for going further than any comparable production has established as the baseline expectation, is not the sustainable professional proposition that the commercial success it has produced might suggest from the outside. The people who have worked closest to Bagans across the franchise's production history have described in various partial accounts the specific quality of sustained professional and personal demand that operating at the center of an institution of this scale, while maintaining the personal investment whose authenticity is the institution's most essential asset produces. It is not the ordinary demand of a successful television career. It is the specific demand of being simultaneously the creative force, the investigative presence, the public face, the brand identity, and the genuine personal heart of something that 20 seasons of commercial development have made far larger than any of those individual roles can be sustained within by a single person operating at the level of genuine investment the show has always required. What happened behind the scenes that made that specific combination of demands unsustainable is the specific development this video documents. And understanding it requires understanding what the 20 seasons of building it produced not just commercially but personally. The Zak Bagans Haunted Museum in Las Vegas is the most direct physical expression of the Ghost Adventures franchise's relationship to the paranormal question that Bagans has ever created. It is not a merchandise store or a tourist attraction organized around the show's brand. It is a collection. Bagans' personal, curatorial, sustained engagement with the physical objects whose anomalous histories and whose documented effects on the people who encounter them he has been accumulating and studying across the span of his investigation career. The Dybbuk box, the Bela Lugosi mirror, the Charles Manson items, the specific objects whose provenance and whose documented behavioral history place them in the category of dangerous in a specific and non-metaphorical sense that Bagans has discussed in the careful terms of someone whose direct experience with the objects has given him a framework for that characterization that his public communications manage carefully. The museum is not simply a collection of spooky things organized for visitor entertainment. It is the physical archive of Bagans' investigation career, the accumulated material evidence of 20 years of direct engagement with the most extreme documented paranormal objects that his investigation history has produced, or that his curation has identified as warranting inclusion. Maintaining that archive, being the person whose physical proximity to its contents is the most sustained of anyone connected to the institution, whose curatorial decisions about what enters it and how it is managed reflect a genuine and personal assessment of the specific risks those decisions involve, is a sustained exposure whose specific character the people who have been closest to Bagans across the museum's operational history have described in terms that communicate something about the cumulative toll of that exposure that the institution's public presentation as a visitor attraction does not fully convey. The Demon House is the clearest documented precedent for what sustained proximity to the category of phenomenon the museum's collection produces in Bagans personally. He purchased it, he filmed in it, he demolished it before any other investigator could access it. And he has discussed what the production of the Demon House documentary did to him physically and personally in more specific and more candid terms than he has applied to any other single investigation in his public record. The museum contains dozens of objects whose individual histories place them in the same category as the Demon House. The cumulative effect of sustained proximity to that collection, whatever the specific character of that cumulative effect is in the terms that Bagans' direct experience of it has established, is part of the behind-the-scenes story whose development this video documents. The Ghost Adventures broadcast record across 20 seasons is an extraordinarily extensive public documentation of Zak Bagans' investigation career, hundreds of lockdown sessions, dozens of locations across multiple countries, a body of documented evidence whose breadth and whose cumulative character represent the most extensive paranormal investigation archive that any single presenter has produced in the history of the television format. What the broadcast record does not document, what the production framework that shapes raw investigation footage into broadcast episodes was not designed to represent, is the behind-the-scenes reality of what sustaining that investigation across 20 seasons has required of the people who make it and of Bagans specifically. The gap between the investigation and the broadcast version of the investigation is not simply an editing gap. It is a gap between what the investigation actually produces and what the commercial framework within which it is presented can accommodate showing. The evidence management decisions that the network's editorial process has applied to the most significant findings across the franchise's run, the personal consequences that sustained direct exposure to the extreme locations the franchise's reputation has established as its investigative domain produces in the people experiencing them that the broadcast format's adventure presentation has consistently framed as dramatic rather than genuinely costly. The specific professional tensions that maintaining the creative integrity of a genuine investigation within the commercial structure of a major network franchise generates across 20 seasons of sustained production. The crew members whose experiences during the most extreme investigation sessions the show has conducted have produced documented personal consequences that the broadcast episodes have referenced without fully characterizing. The specific quality of what Aaron Goodwin and Billy Tolley and Jay Wasley, The crew members whose sustained presence in the franchise's investigation sessions gives them the most direct experience of what those sessions produce beyond what the cameras capture, have communicated in the limited accounts available outside the broadcast record about what 20 seasons of Ghost Adventures has produced in them, and what Bagans himself has been carrying across the franchise's full run that the broadcast format's management of his public presentation has been containing, and that the development this video documents has apparently finally moved beyond the point where continued containment is something he is able to maintain. The specific development behind the scenes that produced Zak Bagans' decision to step away from Ghost Adventures is the element of this video whose direct characterization is simultaneously the most significant and the most carefully constructed, because the complete account of what happened involves a convergence of factors whose individual significance the prior parts of this video have been establishing, and whose combined weight produced in Bagans a specific assessment about the sustainability of continuing the franchise in the form it has always required from him. The convergence includes the cumulative personal cost dimension, whose character the prior parts of this video have established, the sustained physical and psychological toll of 20 seasons of direct investigative exposure at the level of genuine personal investment that the show's authenticity demands, the specific impact of the haunted museum's sustained proximity demands on a person whose direct experience with the objects it contains gives him the most specific available understanding of what that proximity involves, and the accumulated weight of what the complete investigation record contains that the broadcast format has been managing rather than fully communicating. It includes a specific investigation development from the most recent production period whose character placed it in a category that the prior season's most extreme findings had not. Not more of the same, more extreme, more documented, more significant in the specific technical terms of what the investigation's instrument data and its direct experiential component established about what the investigation had encountered, something qualitatively different from the prior record's most extreme moments in a way that the people closest to the production during the relevant period have described in consistent terms as producing in Bagans a response whose character they had not previously observed across 20 seasons of watching him process what the investigation generates. The institutional dimension is the third component. The travel channel relationship, the franchise's commercial scale, the specific tension between what the investigation's most recent findings demanded in terms of honest public communication and what the institutional framework within which the investigation operates was willing to accommodate. The convergence of all three, the cumulative personal cost, the qualitatively different recent finding, and the institutional tension, is what produced the decision, what the decision specifically involves, what quitting Ghost Adventures in the specific form this video's title describes actually means for the franchise and for what comes next, is what the following sections establish. Zak Bagans stepping away from Ghost Adventures is not a retirement, and it is not a simple production hiatus of the kind that television schedules regularly require. It is something whose specific character is more significant than either of those conventional frameworks for understanding a presenter's departure from a long-running franchise fully captures, and whose specific implications for the Ghost Adventures brand, for the travel channel relationship, and for the paranormal investigation community that has built its understanding of what the franchise represents around Bagans' specific and sustained presence at its center, are what this section of the video addresses directly. The decision, as it has been communicated in the accounts available from people connected to the production, is a decision about form rather than about the investigation itself. Bagans' commitment to the paranormal question, to the investigation whose sustained pursuit has organized his professional and personal life since the Goldfield Hotel experience that produced the original documentary, is not what the decision addresses. The investigation continues. The haunted museum continues. The specific engagement with what the investigation has been finding and what it means continues. What the decision addresses is the specific form that engagement has taken across 20 seasons of Ghost Adventures as a travel channel broadcast franchise. The specific requirements that the commercial production relationship and the broadcast format impose on his personal investment in the investigation and on the public communication of what the investigation produces. He is stepping away from the form, not from the work. The distinction is significant because it establishes what comes next as something other than a retirement from the paranormal investigation field. and because it communicates something specific about where the decision comes from that a straightforward retirement or a simple production burnout would not. A man who steps away from the form of his investigation while maintaining the investigation itself is a man whose assessment of the situation is that the form has become an obstacle to the investigation rather than a vehicle for it. That assessment and the specific character of what made the commercial broadcast format feel like an obstacle rather than a vehicle in the period that produced the decision is what the next section of this video addresses. The specific reason that the Ghost Adventures broadcast format has become an obstacle to the investigation rather than a vehicle for it, in the terms that the decision this video documents communicates about Bagans' current assessment of the relationship between the two, is connected to what the investigation's most recent findings have been establishing about the nature of what the show has been documenting. The Ghost Adventures broadcast record is built around a specific and sustained commercial premise: the ongoing dramatic investigation of locations whose paranormal histories and whose documented outputs provide the content whose delivery the network's audience relationship depends on. That premise requires the investigation to be understood as an ongoing approach to answers rather than as the documentation of findings whose character the answers dimension of the premise cannot accommodate. What the investigation has been finding in the most recent production period, and what the qualitatively different development this video's prior sections have referenced without fully characterizing, is evidence whose character places it in the answer rather than the approach category, not more compelling approach evidence. Evidence whose implications, if communicated publicly in the specific and direct terms that Bagans' 20 years of investigative experience give him the framework to characterize accurately, would require the broadcast format to do something the commercial premise cannot accommodate. Acknowledge that the investigation has arrived somewhere. The prior season's most extreme findings were manageable within the format because their character, however dramatic and however evidentially significant, could be framed as compelling approach evidence, as the most significant steps yet toward an answer that the investigation was still working toward. What the most recent findings have produced in Bagans' assessment of the investigation's current position is something that the approach framing no longer fits, and communicating that assessment publicly within the broadcast framework whose commercial premise depends on the approach framing is the specific tension whose irresolvability produced the decision this video documents. The Ghost Adventures audience that has built its relationship to the franchise across 20 seasons of watching Zak Bagans conduct the most extensive, sustained paranormal investigation in television history deserves an honest account of what his decision to step away from the broadcast format means for the investigation's future and for their relationship to the complete record the investigation has produced. The broadcast record they have followed across 20 seasons is the portion of the complete Ghost Adventures investigation record that the Travel Channel Relationship's editorial framework has permitted to reach them, not the complete record. Bagans has communicated this in terms that have become progressively more direct across the franchise's most recent seasons. The language about what the cameras captured and what the network's editorial process has done with the most significant elements of the complete record has been building toward the specific, kind of honest public accounting that the broadcast format's commercial constraints have always prevented him from fully delivering. The decision to step away from the broadcast format is connected to that building, to the progressive narrowing of the distance between what the investigation has found and what Bagans has determined the audience deserves to know about what it has found. Stepping away from the commercial format whose constraints have been the specific mechanism preventing the complete honest communication of the investigation's findings is not the end of that communication. It is potentially the removal of the primary institutional obstacle to its delivery. What comes next? What Bagak builds outside the Travel Channel broadcast relationship with the investigation's complete record and with the specific recent findings whose character the broadcast format could not accommodate is the chapter of the Ghost Adventures story whose development the audience that has followed 20 seasons of the broadcast version has been investing in across the entirety of those 20 seasons without knowing that this is where the investment was building toward. The format that contained the investigation is ending. The investigation is not. Zak Bagans built Ghost Adventures from a consumer camera and a genuine question into the most recognized paranormal investigation franchise in the history of television. 20 seasons, hundreds of investigations, a body of documented evidence whose breadth the paranormal television genre has never matched, and whose complete contents, including the significant portions whose broadcast suppression the franchise's most recent public communications have been approaching an honest account of, represent the most extensive private paranormal investigation archive that any individual has ever assembled. The decision to step away from the broadcast format that has been the vehicle for the investigation's public documentation is not the conclusion of what the 20 seasons were building toward. It is the conclusion of the specific institutional arrangement whose commercial requirements have been the primary obstacle to the complete, honest public communication of what the investigation has found. What that decision changes about everything the Ghost Adventures broadcast record represents is the context within which the record's most significant gaps, the evidence management decisions, the editorial suppressions, the distance between what the investigation produced and what the audience was shown, need to be understood. They were not simply the ordinary content management decisions of a commercial television production. They were the specific mechanism by which the gap between what the Ghost Adventures investigation found and what the institutional framework around it could accommodate showing was maintained across 20 seasons of production. Bagans stepping away from that institutional framework is the first step toward the closure of that gap. What the complete account of what Ghost Adventures found, delivered outside the commercial constraints that have been managing it, looks like is the question that the decision opens. The investigation found things. The format contained what the finding communicated. The format is ending. The finding is not. 20 seasons of Ghost Adventures were building toward this moment. The moment when the man who built the investigation decided that the institutional vehicle whose commercial requirements had always placed limits on the honest communication of the investigation's findings was a vehicle he was no longer willing to accept the limits of. What comes next is what those 20 seasons were always pointing toward, and what it contains is what the broadcast record's most attentive audience has been sensing across the investigation's full run without having it confirmed. The confirmation is coming. The format that delayed it is ending, and Zak Bagans, at whatever personal cost the decision represents, has decided that the investigation deserves the honest account the broadcast format was never equipped to provide.